Here's everything you missed in the Dune trailer. It is Wednesday, my Dunes. That's right, the sleeper has awoken and our minds are effectively unkillable because the first trailer for Dune is finally here. On Wednesday morning, Warner Bros. Revealed the trailer following a Stephen Colbert-hosted Q&A with the cast and director Denis Villeneuve. And suffice it to say, this movie looks good as hell. With sweeping desert vistas, beardless Momoas, plots within plots, and of course gargantuan sandworms, Dune might be the most compelling reason yet for you selfish jerks out there to wear your damn mask so I can actually see this movie in a theater. Now, before we move any further with this video, I want to be transparent about the fact that Dune is made by our cool corporate dad Legendary. We would be reporting on this movie anyway, but we wanted to let you folks know right off the bat. So that said, let's move along. For the uninitiated, Dune is the latest and most ambitious adaptation of Frank Herbert's 1965 sci-fi classic. It's the story of a young man, Paul Atreides, who finds himself caught up in a struggle between warring noble houses over the fate of the desert planet Arrakis, the titular Dune, and its precious commodity, the spice melange. So the easiest, most reductive way to explain Dune is that this is the elemental DNA from which genre staples like Game of Thrones and Star Wars ultimately emerged. And as certified Dunatics will tell you, there's a ton going on in this trailer and plenty to pick apart for die-hard fans and newcomers alike. But if you prefer to read this kind of thing, we have a similarly in-depth breakdown over on Nerdist.com, which I'll link to in the description below. Now that said, we are going to get a wee bit spoilery in this breakdown. We're going to use knowledge of the books to explain all the hidden details, Easter eggs, and most importantly, the context for this trailer. So if you prefer to go into this movie unburdened with terrible purpose, well, you might want to make like the opposite of the sleeper and just go back to bed. Still with me? Great. So the trailer opens with Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides in the midst of this dreamlike vision of the future. "There's something happening to me," he says in voiceover. He's on the desert planet of Arrakis, surrounded by glittering particles of melange. Better known as the spice, this addictive substance prolongs the user's life and enhances their awareness, allowing everything from spacing guild navigators to safely chart paths for interstellar travel to inducing psychotropic clairvoyant trances of what's to come. It's the single most valuable resource in the entire Duneverse, and it can only be found on Arrakis. "There's something awakening in my mind. I can't control it," Paul continues. He sees a mysterious woman in his vision, Chani, played by Zendaya. She's a Fremen, one of the indigenous people of Arrakis, and has their signature blue within blue eyes. That's a side effect of prolonged use of the spice. Now, they're both wearing still suits, moisture-preserving desert garb worn on Arrakis. They kiss and Paul awakens, confirming the fact that it is indeed a dream. But not just any dream, as Paul will soon learn. A prescient dream, a vision of the future. When Paul awakens, he's either in the Arrakeen Keep in the Hunter-Seeker scene, or he's in his bedroom on Caladan, a rainy, watery world that's really hammered home by that bas-relief of fish on his headboard. Paul warns of a crusade coming while dropships fly over a burning city. This is a vision of a siege on Arrakeen, presumably by forces from House Harkonnen, the arch-rival of House Atreides. But whether this is part of an actual battle or part of Paul's prescient dreams remains to be seen. And speaking of those dreams, Paul, in full Atreides military dress, finds himself face-to-face with Gaius Helen Mohiam, the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit, an arcane sisterhood that manipulates social, religious, and political events across the galaxy using their superhuman abilities and advanced mental and physical conditioning achieved through use of the spice. So the Reverend Mother asks a teary-eyed Paul if his dreams often come true, to which Paul replies, yeah, they do. As for why Paul looks so morose, well, in the books he overheard the Reverend Mother talking about his father, and he was displeased with how she treated his mother, or I don't know, maybe he's just an angsty teenager. So storm clouds gather over Caladan, perhaps foreshadowing the tumultuousness of what's to come for young Paul, who's about to play the world's worst game of what's in the box. The Reverend Mother administers the Gom Jabbar test of humanity. It's a psychological test to determine Paul's willpower and awareness. The Gom Jabbar is the poison-tipped needle the Reverend Mother holds to his neck, and the idea is for Paul to withstand the physical and psychological torture of intense pain being applied to his hand by unseen forces inside of the box. Anyway, spoiler alert, Paul doesn't die, he passes the test. From there, we get a glimpse of the Spacing Guild transport ships over Caladan that are helping the family prep to move to the far drier, much hotter planet of Arrakis, and they're going to rule over that as a dukedom in the name of the Padishar Emperor. Next, we see Paul shield fighting with Gurney Halleck, the War Master of House Atreides, played by Josh Brolin. And the duo are wearing Holtzman shields, personal defensive force fields that repel enemy attacks above a certain velocity. As Paul notes in the book, in shield fighting one moves fast on defense, slow on attack. When the shield glows blue, that means the attack was too fast and the shield repels it. However, we see a red flash on Paul's chest indicating Gurney landed a successful hit, and if you look closely in the background, you can see more bas-relief sculptures to mark this as a training room and evoke House Atreides' ancient Greek heritage. Now, speaking of heritage, we see Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto giving a smoldering stare at what seems like a mausoleum or memorial for fallen members of the family. He's making his peace with leaving his home behind for the considerably less hospitable world of Arrakis. However, in spite of Paul's assertions the Duke rules an entire planet, Gaius Helen Mohiam warns that he's losing Caladan and he'll lose Arrakis as well. In addition to our best look yet at Castle Caladan, we see assistants packing up the family's belongings, including what looks like the head of the bowl that gored Duke Leto's father. And here we see Rebecca Ferguson as the Lady Jessica, who's looking on uneasily. She's a Bene Gesserit sister, Paul's mother, and Duke Leto's concubine. Her unease likely comes from leaving the safety of Caladan for Arrakis, which she fears could be a trap set by the sinister House Harkonnen. She's also nervous about the Reverend Mother's visit, the tests being conducted on Paul, which are connected to this ancient Bene Gesserit plot, and some potentially bleak news for Duke Leto. And as we learned from Denis Villeneuve in the cast interview, Jessica's decisions are intimately tied to much of the trouble our heroes will encounter later on. So this transitions into our first glimpses of the desert dunes of Arrakis, and in the distance a plume of dust is visible, likely exhaust from one of the spice harvesters that extracts melange from the desert. This scene may take place later in the film when the planetary ecologist Liet Kynes takes Duke Leto, Paul, and Gurney Halleck to visit the facility. And from there we see the members of House Atreides and their servants preparing to disembark their ship onto Arrakis, but sadly, we don't get to see Gurney Halleck's balisette, his iconic instrument which he's purportedly going to play in this movie. Those giant ships are the aforementioned guild transports, but in the group shot you'll notice ornithopters, the bird-like aircraft they use, and a massive wall behind them that suggests they're safely inside Arrakeen or even the Arrakeen Keep where the Atreides family will reside. Now, in this shot as well, we get a brief glimpse of Thufir Hawat, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson. So Thufir Hawat is the House Atreides Mentat and Master of Assassins, who, in addition to schooling Paul in the art of strategy, is responsible for the security of the Duke and his family. So Mentats are basically humanoid computers. They're people who train their minds to parse vast amounts of data at astonishing speeds, often through the aid of a substance called sappho juice. And if you look at Thufir's lip, it's marked red, a telltale sappho juice stain. Like if that one kid in your cafeteria wasn't just messy from chugging high C all day, but rather freakishly smart. But the true star of this scene is Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho, another of Paul's teachers and an expert fighter. He's been sent ahead of the Atreides family's arrival to forge an alliance with the Fremen people. We get our first glimpse of culture clash here as well, as Paul and Gurney wear the Atreides dress uniforms, while Duncan is rocking a Fremen stillsuit. And speaking of Fremen, next we see Javier Bardem as Stilgar, a respected Fremen leader. And once again we see his blue within blue eyes, the eyes of Ibad caused by glurping that sweet, sweet spice. But danger lurks around every corner on Arrakis. Arrakis is a death trap, warns the Reverend Mother, as we see legions of Sardaukar, the Padishah Emperor's elite commandos. Now, presumably this takes place on the House Harkonnen planet of Gaiety Prime. It's a dark, overcast world, and we see Harkonnen ships overhead. The fact that they're heading for Arrakis is bad news bears. The fact that there are this many of them, well, that's the worst news bears humanly possible. Now, the Sardaukar aren't the only foes our heroes are going to face. They're going to have to deal with the many plots within plots of House Harkonnen. We first see the towering beef castle himself, Glossu Rabban Harkonnen, played by Dave Bautista. Better known as the Beast, he's the violent, sadistic elder nephew of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the family patriarch who we see in the next shot. Played by Stellan Skarsgård, Baron Harkonnen is a master manipulator with a violent streak a mile wide. He's literally always up to no good. As palm trees burn outside the Atreides' new keep, Lady Jessica appears deeply distressed. Paul warns this is an extermination as we quickly cut to a shot of Dr. Wellington Yueh, the Suk doctor who serves as Duke Leto's personal physician. The black diamond tattoo on his forehead indicates he's undergone imperial conditioning, a rigorous process that prevents doctors from taking human life. This is an imperial countermeasure to ensure physicians don't assassinate their noble patients. But clearly, the Atreides have much bigger fish to fry, because Sardaukar drop in, presumably using suspensor tech, while Paul warns they're picking off my family one by one. Paul and his father appear in stillsuits marching into a hangar, presumably to go visit one of the spice harvesters like they do in the book. So maybe this is the flip side of that spice plume we saw earlier in the trailer in the desert distance. But for Duncan Idaho, the only distance that matters is close combat. "Let's fight like demons," he says as he preps to turn a hallway full of Sardaukar into a fine red mist. Now clearly this is a series of battles. We see Idaho penetrate enemy shields in his still suit, and later he looks like he's straight off the cover of a romance novel in a blousy white shirt streaked with blood. And interspersed here we have shots of Atreides' forces clashing with Harkonnen troops, who may or may not be Sardaukar in disguise. From here we flash back to the Gom Jabbar test as the Reverend Mother gives Paul a cool nature fact about how an animal in a trap will often gnaw off its own leg to escape before wondering what Paul would do. I kind of feel like she's trying to tell us something, but who can say? Back on Arrakis, Paul finally meets the girl of his dreams, Chani. Drawing a gun on her initially, he lowers his weapon when he realizes where he knows her from. And then things go from bad to worse and we get a montage of all the myriad dangers facing the Atreides clan. More dropships joining the fray during the siege of Arrakis, ornithopters taking off from the Atreides airfield while an explosion goes off in the background. Now this may be the infamous detonation of the shield wall in the books, but that remains to be seen. Next, we see Atreides forces rushing to survey the damage, including Gurney Halleck, who gets pushed back by these massive explosions. Then we see the single grossest bath as Baron Harkonnen emerges from this pool of black sludge, Lady Jessica nervously walks down a hallway, and we get a terrific match cut of Duncan Idaho saluting with his kinjal, presumably before his battle with the Sardaukar, and Paul salutes with Chani's crysknife, a Fremen weapon made from the tooth of a sandworm. And this presumably happens before a very important duel that I don't want to spoil for you right here. Next, we have one of the single coolest shots of the entire trailer, this truly colossal sandworm devouring a spice harvester hull as Gurney and Paul look on from an ornithopter. Sandworms are primordial ancient creatures that travel beneath the surface of Arrakis, and as we learn in the book, they are crucial to the planet's ecology and definitely not to be trifled with. From there, we see Dr. Yue leading Harkonnen troops into the Atreides Keep. We see our first look at Sharon Duncan Brewster as Dr. Liet Kynes, the planetary ecologist who's gender swapped from the book. And then the pace picks up significantly as ornithopters fly over a rocky outcropping in the desert, and we see a shot of the Beast Raban's Inkvine whip, which he once used to give Gurney Halleck a gnarly scar in the Harkonnen slave pits. Next, we see a mysterious hand leaving a bloody handprint on a concerned-looking Duke Leto. Now, this is most likely the Shadowt Mapes, the mysterious Fremen housekeeper who served the Atreides family when they first moved to Arrakis. Now, Paul, with a bloody nose, puts his crysknife to a Fremen man's throat, and given that Paul is armed with a distinctly Fremen weapon while wearing a stillsuit, likely means this is that aforementioned duel we were talking about. But again, some things you'll just have to see for yourself. A Harkonnen dropship flies over the breached shield wall over the Arrakeen Keep, and Paul screams in agony, possibly from losing someone close to him. Then Paul and Jessica pilot an ornithopter through a dust storm to evade Harkonnen forces. "I must not fear," Paul says as he picks up a handful of the spice, the lifeblood of Arrakis. "Fear is the mind killer." This is from the Bene Gesserit Litany Against Fear, which his mother taught him as part of his training in their ways. And from there, Duncan Idaho kneels before Paul, calling him my Lord Duke. Paul puts his hand on Duncan's shoulder, and that's match cut with a Fremen putting their hand on Paul's shoulder, presumably after his duel. Now, last but not least, we see Paul and Jessica running from a sandworm that looks like it's about to feast on a tray of these Atreides before stopping. Possibly it was lured by the sound of a thumper, a device placed in the sand to attract these massive creatures. Now, I don't know about you, but I got major chills seeing that big-ass sandworm just towering over them. Now, a few other details. This trailer is set to Pink Floyd's Eclipse, which may be a clever nod to Alejandro Jodorowsky's doomed Dune adaptation from the 1970s. Pink Floyd were supposed to provide the brunt of that film's music, but sadly, it never came to pass. Also missing from this trailer are a fair number of important characters, including David Dastmalchian as the Harkonnen mentat Piter de Vries, the Shadowt Mapes, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, Princess Irulan, and the Emperor. Maybe they'll be in this movie, or maybe they'll be in part 2. That's right, this is a 2-part film. And that's everything that we spotted in the Dune trailer. If you want to dive even deeper into the world of Dune, check out Nerdist Book Club's deep dive into the original book, where refined Nerdist content is streamed. Plus, we have explainers, essays, and articles galore on Nerdist.com that'll get you up to speed faster than a Guild Highliner. In the meantime, tell me, what did you think? Are you excited for Dune? Did you spot anything we missed? Let's discuss in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.